the Leading Disability Conference in Melbourne at the moment, which is about disability advocacy. And I'm talking with Nicole Lee, or Nick. Nicole, could you introduce yourself and the work you do?
Of course, my name's Nicole Lee, and I do a lot of advocacy work in the family violence space. I gave evidence at the Royal Commission a couple of years ago into family violence. I was one of the lay witnesses, and from that I was then invited to be part of the VSAC Council, the Victim Survivors Advisory Council for the Victorian Government. So since then, that's been going for 2 years. So I've been advocating on the inside, so that's why a lot of people don't know who I am, that I've been advocating to government on that council, to the policymakers, to changes of legislation within justice, to the design of the Orange Door and the safety hubs, to all sorts of different aspects of the family violence reform, alongside a whole panel of other people that represent different areas of diversity.
Let's come back to that if we can, because a lot of that's been happening in Victoria because of the Royal Commission into Family Violence, and I don't think people nationally have been able to track it as well. Yeah. But you are well known to many people though, because you were on, you can't say that, the ABC
you can't ask that on ABC.
You can't ask that, that's right. What was that like as an experience?
It was a little bit daunting to start with. It's like, do I really want to air such a really, really deeply personal story about myself? But then I thought all the advocacy work that I'm doing and the fact that I felt really the disability was still very silent in this space, and people feel uncomfortable when we're talking about family violence, and then they see that I've got a disability, and then you start talking about sexual assault and the fact that I've got a disability, that people were actively uncomfortable with it, and it was still just an area that people just weren't ready to confront. So when given that opportunity, it's like, okay, I keep telling people they need to recognise this and they need to connect the dots, and that women with disabilities are, we're vulnerable to this kind of abuse, and we're not by choice. We're vulnerable to this abuse because of the situations that we're put in by society. We're put constantly into vulnerable positions.
Can I interrupt there? And can you just give a little bit of the detail of your personal story, as much as you feel like sharing now, and how that feeds into the bigger issues, social issues that you're talking about here? Yeah,
so I met my ex-partner a long time ago now, but we were together for 10 years, so we met through disability sports, and he was my carer as well, and we had a child together. And for the 10 years, the predominant nature of the abuse was sexual assault, very controlling and physical and verbal and emotional and financial. The person I am today is not the person I was back then when I was in that relationship with him. You wouldn't recognise who I was. I didn't even have a personality. I was so disempowered. I was so belittled. I had no autonomy in any decisions that I made, and which people don't understand, that how I got stuck in that situation, or how any of that could possibly have happened to somebody as outspoken and articulate and educated as I am. But they didn't see who I was back then.
And you are not alone. It's
not an isolated story.
Can you talk about its extent and its visibility or lack thereof?
The really quite sad thing is that it is quite, these things do happen in public. Everywhere I went, he came with me. We're talking about the different family violence strategies, and we get women during, when they go to the maternal and child health nurse. Well, I didn't go to a maternal and child health nurse by myself. I didn't even go and see my gynaecologist by myself. He came in everywhere I went, he was with me, and the whole of the world just accepted it because he's caring for you, and what a lovely person, what a lovely carer. He's looking after it, when actually it was controlling, and no one questioned it. Whereas if there was no disability in this scenario, and you had two able-bodied couples, and the husband's coming in watching his wife have a pap smear, the doctor would be going, what the hell is going on here? This doesn't seem right, and it would raise questions and eyebrows. Whereas it was just accepted in my case because, he needs to help her get on and off the examination table. So, okay, well, I guess he might as well just stay in the room. But it was never seen for exactly what it was. So it was very public. even though it was a very, very private situation that I was in. And women with disabilities are twice as likely to end up as victims of family violence.
And is that because of that? Explain why.
Yeah, because of that carer dynamic. As I was saying before, society continuously relies on informal carers to look after us or be responsible for different things. So with the NDIS coming in, we don't need to rely on these informal carers. So if it's not, I went from sort of parents looking after me to this man looking after me, and that was just kind of accepted. So this reliance on other people to take care of me then also renders you sort of stuck in that situation. And people talk about this codependent relationship. I didn't have a choice in that relationship, so that's where I feel it's really offensive to say that it was a codependent relationship, because I was dependent, but it wasn't because of my choice, because I had no other choices, whereas he needed me to need him, and it's a really sort of messy and kind of difficult to I guess articulate really well here, but I've heard people saying this, codependent, and it's not codependent if one person has no choice in this situation and one person has no choice in this scenario, but rely on that person. And when you're put in that situation where you have to rely on that person, so it meant that if I wanted to disagree with him, or if I was unhappy with what was going on, and this happens to other women, I'm definitely not alone in that if the person who's caring for you and you have a disagreement, well, then they can deny you your freedom, they can take away your mobility aids, they can over-medicate you, under-medicate you, refuse you from leaving the house. And so you get to the point where, okay, well, if I do this, what's the result going to be? What's the punishment going to be this time? So you don't fight back, you don't question these things, because you've got no choice. And that's it's a very I don't know how to really articulate it very well, how it's beyond disempowering. It's totally dehumanising, and that's how I ended up as somebody that just had no personality, no identity, because I was so belittled and downtrodden in every sense of my human ability possible.
So what were you able to tap into, and what are you advocating for, particularly around, and as you said, out of the Royal Commission for Family Violence, there's the Victorian Victim Survivors Advisory Council has been set up. I think it's headed by Rosie Batty, or was originally. What are you looking for that can actually address those incredible barriers and impacts?
All the different societal changes, people to recognise and understand, the nature of the violence, and actually then and the very gendered nature of the violence and the issues that we have across our society. We need, it's more than just gender equality, it's understanding how these things have started, what are they born from, what is happening systemically within the system and the broader system, and if we need to, I'm not getting this quite well, to recognise, we talk about social model of disability, but to recognise the barriers that are physically in people's way, and to listen to victim survivors of violence and victim survivors of domestic abuse and assault and rape, so that we can actually make a change that is going to be long term, instead of what's good for the sector, actually know what's good for the people the sector are working for. And I think that's a massive shift with the VSAC Council, and it's a massive shift with all the changes that are happening in Victoria post the Royal Commission.
You mean by that what do you mean it's not looking at what's good for the sector, it's looking good at who the sector works for?
Yeah, so
where has that gone wrong?
Well, I think in the past everybody's gone to the sector for the answers. Everybody's asked the sector, what do you think we should be doing? How do you think we should be changing this? And well, ultimately the sector, has to support their business model, to put it in a nutshell, I guess. They're supporting their organisation, and they're supporting what's going to keep them going long term. So in one sense of the term, you know, if the sector was really working on behalf of the victims, they're putting themselves out of a business. But you know, they're not living it, they're not experiencing it, and they're not every day seeing the barriers, because actually they've been for such a long time part of the barriers, and for so long things have not been working, and we've got this, you know, boss, there's this big change in the air at the moment. It may not be right now, and we may not be doing the right things or making the right decisions, but at least it's changing, because it was so wrong before. Something had to happen, and we can't build on something, we can't improve something if we're not changing it and pushing the boundaries and looking for the things that are going wrong and looking for the things that are actually going right, because along the ways when you make mistakes, you also get learning as well.
And you're talking beyond the disability sector in terms of needing professional groups to actually be alert to and step up for this. You sort of talk particularly about going to doctors and having scans and those things. Like, which professions need to come on board more?
Oh boy, Jesus, so many of them. From the support workers coming into your homes, to the people who are writing the policies, to the ministers that are sitting in, putting those things into Parliament that go into play and become legislation. The whole range. So from your very, very front end workers to, you know, your higher up organisations and policies and procedures, and yeah.
So what could fuel that would be clearly community change. So if we go back to You Can't Ask That, and how it was, you know, you had to really think about telling your story and opening up and talking about those sorts of issues. What was the response like? Do you feel, and also I guess the response to at a policy level too at the Royal Commission stage, are you seeing change?
Yeah, well, for the family violence field, I'm seeing change, and it's, you know, some of it is wrong, and then there's bits and pieces that is like, yeah, that is really, really good, and I'm seeing positive changes, and anything, you know, it's going to take about 10 years. You know, nothing's going to change overnight. We're not going to see immediate radical changes overnight. It's slowly embedding those little bits and pieces, and that when we look back in 10 years' time, we will see this massive difference, and that's, I guess, the beginnings of that is what I'm seeing right now, is the beginnings of that longer term change. But as for getting to, you know, sort of tell your story publicly on something, a big forum like You Can't Ask That, I mean, the response I got from people was really positive. People were surprised and shocked at the story, but also grateful and happy, and well, the best way to put it, that you know, that I was open and honest about my experience, and it broke down a lot of those barriers and stigmas of what we think, you know, a victim should be, and what our ideas of what a perpetrator should be. It wasn't infantilising in any sense of the word, in the way that we've, I guess, we've been portrayed in the past, you know, people with disability and victim survivors of family violence, that at the end of the day, the victim survivors, we're not the, you know, the inspiration. We're just women, we're just people, and people with disability, we're just mothers, we're just people, we're, you know, average, you know, everyday people. And you know, when we start going into this infantilising idea, which You Can't Ask That didn't do, was that we also need to see the perpetrators and put them in sight, that they're not these scary monsters hiding in a corner, they're regular people, they're everyday people. And I think that's what a lot of people find really confronting, and that's where you get that narrative, oh, he was a good bloke, is because we keep thinking of them as monsters, and we keep thinking of victims as helpless, and we're not seeing the actual reality of people trying, you know, a woman trying to survive, and somebody exerting their, you know, an everyday person exerting their power and control over the top of them.
One final question, which is, you've got a session coming up here, marketing disability. Yep. You're participating in that. And it's going to look at what will it take to shift attitudes and behaviours towards people with disabilities. What will be your main points?
My main points is that we need to stop looking for the extraordinary. We need to stop going to the extremes when it comes to disability. We're either looking at the charity model, or we're looking at the elites, we're looking at the Stephen Hawkings, we're looking at the number ones in the world, we're looking at those that overachieve. Now in every population in the world, there's only so many people that can achieve elite status, and looking for that in every person with a disability, you're missing out on the good. So stop looking for the extraordinary and start embracing the ordinary.
Thank you so much. It's fantastic.
Thanks. See ya.